thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We're thrilled to have Ted Reinstein here to bring us through New England cities and towns, and we get to enjoy this for about an hour. He's going to take us to all kinds of places in New England, including diners. Ted has 20 years plus of reporting and telling stories, so I'm really looking forward to this talk. Just so you know, this is funded through a Chenaf 15 grant that I received from the towns of Littleton, the town of Boxborough, and the town of Acton. And funding for Chenaf 15 is provided from Leahy Hospital and Medical Center and Winchester Hospital through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Determination of Needs process. So take it away, Ted. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, as Cheryl mentioned, to the Community Health Network Area number 15 for its generous support in sponsoring this talk tonight. Some of you may have been to one of my talks earlier because I have spoken at the libraries of all three of those communities, Acton, Littleton, and Boxborough. And it's a pleasure to be able to join all of you, in some cases, together tonight. Of course, I wish it was in person, but we all wish everything was in person that's not in person now, right? But we will be. The important thing is we will be. So tonight I'm going to shrink a road trip all around New England into just under 60 minutes. And we'll all live to tell about it. And I'm going to share with you some of my favorite places, some of my favorite people, some of my favorite stories from over almost 25 years of reporting around New England. And then at the end, I would be happy to take any questions anybody has. Not during the talk, but if you can either use the chat function to put a question into the chat, or we can have you unmute yourselves at the end and ask me directly, whichever works for you. So with that, let's jump in, shall we? So I always like to say, how would you describe New England if New England was like a landmark, iconic, famous restaurant? Because, famous restaurants are famous for something, right? They all have their signature dishes. So I always like to think, like, what would New England's signature dishes be, right? Obviously, the ocean would be a pretty major, it's one of the things that identifies New England. The ocean and the mountains. New England is one of only two regions of the entire country that have that geographic feature, right? There's only two regions, just New England and the Pacific Northwest, where you and parts of Northern California, where you have that combination of actual mountains coming right down to the ocean. And history, right? I mean, other than native settlement, which obviously goes back tens of thousands of years potentially in New England, thousands anyway. In terms of European settlement, the longest stretch of European settlement where it begins here in New England is history, right? And, just to use that restaurant metaphor a little bit too, famous restaurants always have side dishes that they're famous for too, right? Something they do with potatoes or something they do with onions, or right? So what would New England's sides be? I always say, maybe you think differently. You might have your own ideas. I always say politics, right? Sports, absolutely one of the most absolutely, incredibly devoted sports part of the country, right? And actual food. I mean, New England is one of those regions that actually has a very, very defined, famous cuisine associated with it. That's not the case in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, except a lot of bratwurst, right? But New England is seafood. People come from all over the world. Boston clam chowder. We are going to be talking about chowder in a few minutes because it's not lobster that actually is going to be what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. Extra credit if you know that the gentleman in the fedora is none other than Boston's famous rogue mayor, James Michael Curley. And number 6 of the Celtics doesn't need an introduction, does he, right? Bill Russell, Hall of Fame, great of the Boston Celtics. Now, you may know if you have watched any of my travels around New England that I almost invariably end up visiting a local diner. That is my favorite kind of food. I'm not really a big fancy food person, but I do love New England diners, both because of their charm, their coziness, their history, their tradition, and often their food, So I'm going to share with you. Some of my favorite diners tonight. So you might be wondering, just where are we headed for this New England road trip. So we're going to use Boston as our jumping off point and ending point. We're going to go north through the North Shore of Massachusetts, further north into Maine. We're going to go west into the White Mountains of Vermont. We're going to continue west into the Green. Did I say the White Mountains of Vermont? Just seeing if you were paying attention. Okay, everybody awake now? White Mountains of New Hampshire, further west into the Green Mountains of Vermont, and then we're going to come back into Massachusetts, and then a few surprises before we finish up. So with that, I hope you're all comfortable. Hope you have a nice drink or a cold or hot. I have my, like you had to wonder if it would be a Dunkin' Donuts or not. Of course it is. I have my dunk, and we're off. So I mentioned we were going to start first on the North Shore. I probably know more about the North Shore than any other part of New England, but mostly that's because it's where I grew up. It's where I lived until I was 18. Winthrop, Massachusetts. Gateway to the North Shore. You know, I always say Winthrop is to the North Shore what Quincy is to the South Shore, which is to say the gateway to their respective shores, because if anything, they're just closer to Boston, and they're almost equidistant, each of them, from Boston. 1630, Winthrop, or as I like to refer to it, the charming little seaside town at the end of runway 27L. Yeah, it was a noisy childhood. Anytime you see a picture like this of Winthrop where you can see the sky, look closely, because if you look closely, you will absolutely see at least one, maybe two, maybe three, maybe four, depending on time of day, time of year, whether it's a holiday period, planes stacked up, because a airplane takes off or lands over Winthrop, Massachusetts every 18 to 21 seconds. Thankfully, they're quieter than they were when I was a kid growing up there. And I had some fun with some arrows with this picture. You can see pretty much the house where I grew up, sort of. I think I picked it out in the Highlands on Winthrop there, right on the water. An airplane taking off. And the field where I played baseball at Point Shirley in Winthrop, which is the part of Winthrop that is closest to Logan Airport, less than a 16th of a mile at that point, very close. I used to think I could see people's faces in the windows of landing airplanes. Probably my imagination, but as you can see, you could never, ever today build an international airport that close to a densely populated urban area. Winthrop is the single most densely populated town in Massachusetts, just over 1 square mile, and 14,000 plus people. So that's very densely populated, very densely populated. But when they were landing airplanes in 1920 at Logan Airport, they were single props that were delivering mail to New York City. So airplanes, jet airplanes, were still far into the future. So with that, we are off for the, let's call it the real North Shore, and Cape Ann. Cape Ann, one of my favorite places in New England, certainly in Massachusetts. Part of what I love about Cape Ann is just that. It's the other Cape, right? Because as we know, there are 2 Capes in Massachusetts, but only one of them is the one that sort of, you don't need to say the full name. If you say on a Friday afternoon to somebody, I'm heading to the Cape for the weekend, no one in recorded history has ever asked, oh, which Cape? Doesn't happen, right? But there is another Cape, and it has an incredible history all by itself, incredible beauty all by itself. It doesn't have everything that Cape Cod does. It doesn't have a miniature golf course every 2.3 miles. It doesn't have traffic backed up for miles on summer mornings. They're 2 different places. It does have a history, European history, going back a century earlier than Cape Cod, when there was a fishing community full-time in Gloucester, which is the only major city on Cape Ann. You know, the curious thing about Cape Ann, one of the curious things is that it was an island until just almost the 1960s. It was the late 1950s when the Abram P. and Andrew Jr. Bridge was built, which connected Route 128, right, with Cape Ann over the Annisquam River, and then it wasn't an island anymore. As I mentioned, Gloucester, the one actual city on Cape Ann, and arguably America's most storied seaport, that in New Bedford. This photograph by a wonderful longtime friend of mine, Mark Canagas, who is a Rockport native, grew up in Rockport. Another photograph of Mark's of his hometown, Rockport, and there is motif number 1. You know, Motif number one is one of those places in New England that people outside of New England, for some reason, think of when they think of New England. It's not that we wouldn't think of it. It's just that we never really do think about motif number one. You know, at one time, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe, motif number one was said to be, in some quarters, the most painted, most photographed landmark in America. That was never true. I am quite sure, but they sure do love repeating that in Rockport. It's not even the original motif number one. The original motif number one came down in the blizzard of '78. That's a replica. But as I say, case in point, for people outside of New England thinking of Cape Ann, when they think of New England, here's a cover of my first book, New England Notebook. And authors very seldom have anything to do with the artwork that's on the cover. So I was sent this, you know, before my book came out. And, I thought it looked more like a cookbook, frankly. But I want to tell you a funny story about motif number one. So there is another building right behind motif number one that looks just like motif number one. You may never have noticed it, but maybe you'll notice it now. So look at that photograph on the cover of motif number one, and look at the part of motif number one. It forms like an L. There's a low one-story barn-like thing, and then there's that little narrow house thing that's 2 stories, right? Look behind the 2-story part, and there's a white building that looks exactly the same as motif number one. I thought for years I created this funny scenario in my mind where that building, after the original came down, that building behind was like that was like the understudy for motif number one, and that this time they were going to have a second motif number one ready if this one came down, and they would just, you know, roll it up and slap some red paint on it. But no, that's not what it is. I don't know what it is, but I know what it's called now, sort of, because a few years ago I met a wonderful lobsterman out of Cape Ann named Gussie Contrino. So Gussie and I found ourselves standing and chatting in Rockport Harbor, and we're looking over there, and I thought, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. I said, I got a question for you. He said, what? I said, what is the building behind motif number one called? He said, that white building behind motif number one? I said, yeah, what's that called? He said, oh, that's easy. Motif number two. What do you think they're going to call it? It's not called motif number two. Halibut Point. Halibut Point, one of my favorite places on Cape Ann. It really, really is. If you know it, if you've been there, you know why. It is just one of those places where not only is it beautiful, but you can get away from everything and everybody. It is an abandoned granite quarry. The quarry part itself has been filled in by water, so it forms this just beautiful kind of rock granite pool. And you can walk on further down to the water, like that picture there, and you can walk for miles on either side, get away. You can find all these wonderful nooks and crannies and just get away from everybody. Interesting thing about Halibut Point, it is not only the most eastern and northernmost point on Cape Ann, it is also, along with Cape Porpoise, Maine, the most easternmost point. Well, that's redundant. The easternmost point, that's what I was trying to say, the easternmost point, along with Cape Porpoise, Maine, of the continental United States, meaning that when the sun rises in the east every morning, that is one of the 2 points of the United States that gets the sun first. It also happens to be next door to another one of my favorite places on Cape Ann, the Lobster Pool, right there on Route 27, right on the water. Beautiful place to watch the sunset, beautiful place to sit outside and get a lobster roll. But I mentioned a few minutes ago, it was not lobster that we were going to talk about, but it did involve clams, not clam chowder. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. I hope you've eaten, because in my case, I haven't, so this is just torture for me. But Cape Ann is actually famous for clams, specifically fried clams. As to why fried clam is said to have been invented on Cape Ann, story goes just over 100 years ago. So summer of 1916, July, Chubby Woodman, if that name sounds familiar, yes, Same woodman. He's the guy who started it all on that narrow causeway there in Essex. He and his wife, Bessie, had a little seafood place. You know, they sold fish. They sold shellfish. They'd chuck it for you. They sold veggies they grew. They had a fryer, and Bessie would chop up potatoes real thin, create their version, you know, of like a potato chip. So the story goes that hot summer morning, 1916, fisherman friend of theirs comes in. Probably wanted to get in out of the sun, right? So he comes in and he's watching them work, and he says, "Hey, Chub, you ever try throwing one of those clams in the fryer?" And Chubby said, "No." They both agreed it would be worth a try, right? Slow summer morning. So they tossed the clam into the fryer, and then they fished it out. Inedible, like rubber. Bessie Woodman, observing this, was about to prove the truth of the famous maxim, behind every successful man, there's an even smarter woman. First of all, dunces that they were, she shucked the clam. Hello. Then she dragged the shucked clam, through the batter she was using for the potatoes. She tossed that in the fryer. She said, "Try that." They took it out. Boom. The rest is history. And now people were lining up at Woodman's for this new taste sensation, the fried clam. And now it's famous. Cape Ann is famous for fried clams. Route 133, the main, east-west highway that goes through Cape Ann, is now sometimes called the Clam Highway. And the three places that are kind of most famous for fried clams: Woodman's in Essex, Farnham's right down the street, also in Essex, and over in Ipswich, the Clam Box today are said to be engaged in the clam wars. Well, I got to tell you, just like motif number one, that's a lot of hooey. There's no wars. These people are the best of friends. I've known them all. On a hot summer night, busy night, if one of them starts to run low on clams, they'll send the runner over to one of the other places, come back with a bushel of clams. No war. But I guess promotionally, that it's kind of exciting to call it the clam wars that don't exist. So with that, we're out of Massachusetts for now, and we are heading north up to Maine. Of course, in Massachusetts, that's called going down east, which makes no sense to anybody else in the country, but that's one of those New Englandisms, right? We're going down east to Maine. It's a nautical term. So Maine, what is there to say? I love Maine, where the mountains truly do meet the sea. I love coastal Maine. I love interior Maine. I love hiking in Maine. I love fishing in Maine. I love Maine. So I'm going to share with you two of my favorite Maine factoids, okay? And then you can share them with your friends, and you'll look wicked smart. So the first one, you're looking at it. You are absolutely looking right at this factoid, but you may never have thought of it before, so I'll help you out. Maine is the only state in the country that borders only one other state, right? I think if Maine had its way, it wouldn't border any other state. But that job is taken by Hawaii, so that won't really work. The other factoid is also kind of self-evident, but it definitely takes more explanation. So I want you to think about the ragged and rocky coast of Maine. You know how that winds in and out and in and out, all the way up the coast, all the way up the coast, all those inlets and harbors and islands and finger peninsulas. And, if you hop over the border in New Hampshire, say Portsmouth into Kittery, and start driving up Route 1, right? You could easily take 4.5, 5 hours before you just get to Bar Harbor. You could take another 3.5 hours just to get to the elbow or the nose there, however you want to look at it, Machias, Eastport. And you could easily spend another 6, 7.5 hours getting up to the top of Maine at Van Buren, Fort Kent, or Rustic, right? But what if you could straighten out the ragged and rocky coast of Maine, like a balled up piece of twine, and just boing, right? Magically have a straight line. You know what you get? 3,000 miles. In other words, from Boston to San Francisco. Now, that will really impress people. If you don't even have to give me credit, okay? Now, anybody know where we are? How about now? I'll give you a hint. It's on Muscongas Bay. Oh, come on, household word. No, no one's ever heard of Muscongas Bay. We are at Pemaquid Point. Pemaquid Point sits in mid-coast Maine, right? So you'd go up to, say, Portland, 2.5 hours to Portland, another hour and 3/4 to Brunswick, Topsom, before you go over the water there, bang a right, head south, drive about 21 miles. When the road ends in the little town of Bristol, boom, that's what you're looking at right there. You're looking at the lighthouse. You're looking at the lighthouse keeper's house. There's a little museum there. Some people sometimes say the lighthouse looks familiar. And they're right. It should. It's a very common looking lighthouse. It was a very, very common design of lighthouses in the 19th century. Very practical, relatively cheap to make, to build. A lot of lighthouses look like that. Nobska on Cape Cod, Falmouth looks like that. The Nubble, also in Maine, looks like that. It looks like a somewhat shortened version of Boston Light in Boston Harbor, but it is Pemaquid Point. And but it's not the lighthouse that has always drawn me there. I've been there all 4 seasons of the year. We've established the lighthouse is nice, but there's nothing really unique about it. It's not the lighthouse. It's what's behind the lighthouse. Because behind the lighthouse, there is like this almost 2.5 acres of this field of kind of horizontally striated rocks you can see there, which make this almost kind of natural staircase down to the water. And Muscongas Bay forms kind of a horseshoe there. You can't see to the north, you can't see to the south, just straight out to the horizon. Next stop, coast of Europe. I've been there all 4 seasons, as I said, different times of day, different weather. And for me, it just is this place that just says ragged and rocky coast of Maine, don't you think? With that, Chowder, anybody? I told you it was coming. I told you it was coming. So here's the thing about clam chowder. I'm an expert. I will put my, well, I don't know in terms of my own clam chowder making it, but in terms of tasting it and the best clam chowder. So I had a quest for many, many years at Chronicle, a personal quest. And it was to find the best clam chowder in New England, period. And I had that quest going on for about 16 years. And then it ended. It didn't end because I lost my taste for clam chowder. It ended because I found it. I found it. I'm here to share with you, if you can keep a secret, I am here to share with you where the best clam chowder in New England. And nothing else is close. So oddly enough, it's in Mid-Coast Maine, where I did not expect to find it. Mid-Coast Maine is not even on the ocean. I mean, the Buttermilk Cove, like one of those narrow peninsulas, it's an inlet, saltwater, comes up there. So technically it is, but I wouldn't have expected to find it there. I certainly would never have expected to find it where I found it, which is to say the Gurnett Trading Company. Doesn't even sound like a place to sell seafood, right? I mean, if you told me, have you tried the Gurnett Trading Company online? Oh, fantastic fleece blankets and balsam fur and scented candles, but not seafood. And if I told you what this little place was before it sold seafood, you'd be even more skeptical. This was a tiny little 2-car repair garage. They cleaned it out very well. Julie and Brian Soper did, that is. So this was their dream. This was their dream. Both were commercial fishermen. Well, Brian still is. Julie came in off the water about 15 years ago. Great cook, had a book full of recipes. This was their dream, and they did it. Isn't it great when someone is able to fulfill their dream? They did it. They did it. As I said, Brian is still a commercial scallop. How fresh is the fish at the Gurnett Trading Company? Well, let's take scallops. So Brian is a commercial scalloper. On any given day, he might be scalloping at 6:30 in the morning. He might be done at 8:30, ties up, gets his gear put away, leaves the dock in his truck at, say, 9 o'clock, 9:30. Let's say by 10:30, he's at the Gurnett Trading Company. He hands off a bushel of scallops to Julie, and she starts cooking them. and at 11:30, they're on the menu. You order them for lunch. Those scallops may have been sitting on the ocean floor less than 2 hours earlier. That's fresh. But I digress, because it wasn't scallops that I was after. So this is about 7, 8 years ago. And my longtime Chronicle photographer and I, Carl Vieira, were in Brunswick shooting some stories. And it was lunchtime, right? So we decided to stop for lunch. And we're driving by this place. We'd never seen it before. And we said, I don't know, let's give it a shot. So we did. So I think we ordered like a tuna roll and a bowl of chowder, which was kind of par for the course. And the chowder came out first. Look, I took one spoonful. And I'm not going to say that I heard like celestial music and the Hallelujah chorus in my ears, but something close. This chowder was life altering. I said to Carl, I took one spoonful. I said, did you taste this? And he took one spoonful and he nodded. I said, that's it. This is the best chowder I've ever tasted. Instantly. You know what made it so good? Curiously, I've often felt that chowders go wrong not by what somebody leaves out, but puts in. In other words, potatoes. Biggest culprit of all, right? Like, if you like potatoes, order a baked potato. Get potato leek soup. Don't gum up clam chowder. Clams are the star. They don't have to share the spotlight with anybody in clam chowder, okay? Greens, I've had people put celery, pieces of lettuce, pickles, celery. Please, you want greens? Order a salad. Don't gum up the chowder. This thing was pure. It was thick. It was buttery. Oh, as I said, I haven't eaten yet, so I have to move on. But now you know where to get the best clam chowder in New England. But again, it's not to be shared. It's not to be shared with just anybody. Okay? So we're moving on, moving west. You know, if you exit Maine through its western mountains and hop over the border into New Hampshire, the mountains of western Maine then become the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So why not start at the very top of the White Mountains, the very top of New England, the highest point east of the Mississippi River, Mount Washington, one of the most storied mountains in the world, not because it's the highest by any means, right? But because it has experienced some of the worst weather in the world. Highest wind speed ever recorded, summit of Mount Washington. And there I am on the summit with the man I shared the chowder with, my longtime photographer, Carl Vieira. But it's not mountains I want to talk to you about right now. It's not Mount Washington. Different mountain entirely. This mountain, well, the mountain is still there. Part of it isn't there anymore, which is what we're going to talk about. But the mountain is still there. Cannon Mountain still towers high above Franconia Notch. The lake that takes its name from what's not there anymore is still there, Profile Lake, which took its name from what towered above on Cannon Mountain on the cliffs. By this point, you probably know what I'm talking about, the Old Man of the Mountain. The great stone face, the Old Man of the Mountain, which you're right, is no longer there. So you might be wondering why I'm talking about something here in my road trip that we wouldn't be able to see anymore. Ah, really? Are you sure about that? I'm going to show you how you can see the Old Man of the Mountain again. So, you know, the Old Man of the Mountain, easily New Hampshire's most famous landmark. It's gone, but still on the roadsides, the state highway sign, still on the state license plate. But, you know, I think part of what made the Old Man, I think for those of us of a certain age, we remember, I'm sure you remember seeing the first time as a younger person, maybe even a little kid, the Old Man. What we didn't see, right, was that the Old Man of the Mountain was not a sculpted thing, right? I mean, I can actually remember the first time I saw it, because I remember my parents saying, when we get near, you're going to look for the Old Man of the Mountain, and you'll see him up on the mountain. I was expecting to see like an old man sitting on top of a mountain and like waving to cars as they went by. And as we got closer and I saw how high the mountain was, I said, wow, How are you going to see that guy? But you did see it. And part of what made it such a memorable experience was how you saw it, right? Because the old man was not a one-dimensional sculpted thing, right? You could be within 3/4 of a mile. You could be within 1/4 of a mile, looking up, waiting to see it. You still weren't seeing it, right? You had to get in just the right spot, right? Because it was made up of many different rock outcroppings. And only from a certain spot at a certain distance, about 2,400 feet, did it look like that. If you were above the old man, if you were to the side of the old man, if you were right up at the same altitude of the old man, the great stone face, you didn't see a stone face. You just saw a jumble of rocks. Believe me, that's what it looked like. Because we didn't see the 7 separate outcroppings from the ground. You know what else you didn't see? You didn't see all the work that people have done for the past 75 years or so to try to shore up and preserve the old man. Because they knew sooner or later the Great Stone Face was going to fall down. The Great Stone Face was only there, had only been created because other rocks on those cliffs had fallen away to reveal that natural outcropping. So you didn't see the giant turnbuckles. You didn't see the giant foot length and width steel cables, the concrete in the rock cracks meant to try to preserve the old man. And it worked for a while until nature took its course. And the night of May 3rd, 2003, it all came down. It really was something of a perfect storm, literally, really. It had been an unusually warm spring in the White Mountains that spring, 2003. And it had gotten unusually warm, almost 70 degrees, unheard of in the Whites. There had been torrential rains. And then on May 2nd and 3rd, a cold front came through. And the temperature dropped more than 40 degrees in less than 24 hours, fell below freezing. All that water in the cracks, the rocks, froze, expanded, and the rest, well, we know what ice does, right? It expands, and sometime about 1:30 in the morning, the old man came down, and people were devastated. People were devastated. The next day, that day, there were thousands of people that turned out to Profile Lake just to stand around and look up and kind of grieve, really, you know. And nobody might have been more upset than my wonderful late friend Dick Hamilton, who I used to kid was the other old man of the mountain. Dick, for many years, was head of tourism in the White Mountains. He worked in Lincoln, which was just south of the Notch, and he lived in Littleton, just north of the Notch. So he traveled through the Notch twice a day. He told me once, he said, you know what? I know who my real boss is. And he said every night when he went through the Notch, he looked up there and he said, good night, boss. And when the old man fell, Dick Hamilton was put in charge of a commission to look at how best to commemorate the old man. They got all kinds of proposals, suggestions, many of them awful. One of them was to create a replica of the old man made out of fiberglass up on the Cannon Mountain Cliffs. I'm sure glad that didn't happen. But Dick, in his infinite wisdom, was in position to approve the winning proposal. And it was winning in more ways than one. It was the work of Ron Magers, a wonderfully skilled toy designer out of Newburyport. And Ron created something called the Profilers. And as I mentioned at the start, they are in place now. So maybe you've seen them if you've been by. They are ingenious, and they allow one to see the old man of the mountain once again. And I'm going to show you how. So the Profilers really resemble kind of an inverted hockey stick, right? An inverted hockey stick, kind of like that, right? So if this is the blade of the hockey stick, you know, standing up, and this would be the stick itself, and this is like an inverted hockey stick. And the end of the blade, so to speak, points up and looks up at the Cannon Mountain Cliffs where the Great Stone Face used to be. But remember how I said at the beginning that the old man of the mountain, the Great Stone Face, was actually comprised of 7 different stone outcroppings that only taken all together and only viewed at the right angle, at the right distance, did it look like the Great Stone Face. So what Ron Mager's creation is, on the blade, in miniature, are all 7 stone outcroppings that make up, I'm going to hold this up to my camera, right? So there you go. See that? From the smallest, which form the tip of his nose, to all the 7 stone outcroppings. And what you do is you get yourself so that you're looking behind these things, right? Like these people are doing, right? And then just like you have to from the ground, and get yourself in position to look up there, and then it's like he's there all over again. Isn't that amazing? And I've been there and heard people say, oh, it's like he's up there again. Wonderfully ingenious creation. So New Hampshire is not just about mountains. It's also about, well, lakes and rivers and streams. It's even got a little itty bitty seacoast. But it's also about a whole lot of woods. They don't call it the Great North Woods for nothing, right? But what I want to share with you is something I found in the woods just this past fall. I don't mean to suggest I discovered it. I didn't know it was there. Shame on me. And now I can't forget it. So part of what makes this amazing is not just what it is, but where it is, because it is in southern New Hampshire, right? So what's extraordinary is that this thing that is so rare is only 20-25 minutes from New Hampshire's busiest urban area, Nashua, right? Just due west, 20-25 minutes from Nashua, right? Through Milford, in Wilton, New Hampshire, is that rarest of things, an old growth forest. What is an old growth forest? An old growth forest are trees that basically have never been cut down for at least 200 years, right? So these are trees that are 200 feet high. How high is 200 feet if you're looking up at a tree? What I always say, full neck extension, full neck extension. So you have to bring your neck all the way back till you can't bring it back any further. It's on the tip of your spine. That's how high 200 feet is. And they're trees that are 250 to 350 years old in the Sheldrick Forest Preserve. What does that mean? That means these trees that are 25 minutes west of Nashua predate the American Revolution. That to me is amazing, because all over southern New England, trees were deforested for going back 400 years. Trees we see today are second, third growth trees, because originally especially places around where people lived, metropolitan areas, right? Big villages, then cities. These trees were deforested first for heat, for building homes, right? For ship masts, and then for paper, telephone poles. So it is incredible that these trees remain. But sometimes people don't want to destroy something that they realize is really unique. And that's what happened with the Sheldrick Forest Preserve. You know, today it is owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy, right? And interestingly, John Sawhill, who is one of the founders of the Nature Conservancy, is famous for this quote, that a society is defined not just by what it creates, but by what it refuses to destroy. Nothing could be more true than the Sheldrick Forest Preserve, because here, one man, Swift Corwin, refused to destroy a forest. So the Sheldrick Forest had been owned by the Sheldrick family for over 200 years. And then about 25 years ago, they sold it. And the new owner of the forest, about 245 acres, the new owner wanted to maximize his investment. He wanted to sell the timber rights. Then he wanted to turn over the ground and sell the gravel rights. Then he wanted to sell the real estate, okay, his land. So he hired Swift Corwin and 5 other foresters to go into the forest and to tag the trees for timbering, right? So they were tagging trees that were going to be cut down. So they go about doing this, and after about a week and a half, he and his team realized these are old growth trees. These trees are 300 plus years old, and he could not cut them down. There I am standing with Swift Corwin last fall in the forest. He was explaining to me how he realized that he just could not cut these trees down. And he went to the Nature Conservancy. They didn't know about this. He said, this is a rarity. Trust me, as a forester, You don't find this anymore in southern New England. And so they came up with a plan to compensate the landowner. Look, could he have made a few more bucks if he had cut down every single tree, sold every piece of gravel, and sold every single housing lot? Undoubtedly. So give the guy a little credit. You know, he was willing to take a little bit of a loss and preserve the forest, and he did. And today the forest is owned and run by the Nature Conservancy. It is accessible to the public. And if you go, don't miss the hand tree. Really one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. This is a tree that has grown up, and little kids get up in the tree, and it really looks like a tree holding a little kid. It's loveliest thing. So with that, out of New Hampshire, into Vermont, and might as well start at the highest point of Vermont too, right? Mount Mansfield, highest point in Vermont. You know, a lot of people don't know, and that's Mansfield and Stowe, the ski area. A lot of people don't know that Mount Mansfield also has an old man, a stone face. You're looking at it. Winter is not the easiest time to see it. How about now in summer? You see it? Now, it needs to be pointed out, this is like an old man lying down, right? Like looking up at the sky. He's got a forehead, nose, upper lip, lower lip, chin, Adam's apple. Here, let me flip it for you. So it's standing upright. Yeah, very long face, you know? Yeah, that would be the ultimate. Why the long face, bud? I always say that the Great Stone Face of Mount Mansfield pretty much succeeds just in making you miss the old man of the mountain that much more. That was a stone face. This one you got to stretch a little bit for. However, I did mention Stowe. I love to ski. I've been skiing since I was 5, 6 years old. I love to ski. I don't love the industry of skiing. I don't love at all. In fact, I loathe how expensive skiing has become. Not because that I can't afford it. I feel very fortunate that I can afford to ski a few times every year and bring my kids. Most people can't. Many people can't. Skiing has become prohibitively too expensive for millions and millions of people. Don't like that about skiing. However, this place that I'm going to share with you is the antithesis of that. Not only that, it is a place that is all about community. You know, I love what we call third places in American life. I've mentioned diners. I'm going to talk about more about diners in a moment. Diners, public libraries, general stores, which I've also written about. These are called third places, right? Because when you think about where we spend the bulk of our time in life, the first place you can imagine is home, right? Family. The second place you can probably also guess is work. Third places are community gathering places. They're not work, they're not home, but they're places where we like to spend time because that's where communities gather. And all those places are third places. This is the first ski area I have ever heard of, ever found, ever been at, which I would call a genuine third place, a community gathering area. Why? Because it's owned by the community. It's owned by the community, and nobody makes a dime at little Northeast Slopes in East Corinth, Vermont. It really is amazing. It's been there a long time, been there since the 1930s. In fact, its original rope tow is today the oldest continuously operating ski lift, period, in North America. And the area of East Corinth, which is in Orange County, Vermont, so think like East Central Vermont, okay? Very, very low income area. A lot of families, 5 or 6 communities, a lot of communities, 5 or 6 communities, including East Corinth, where people are living in and around the poverty line, right there in Vermont, right? So these are not people that would be able to afford to go skiing, generally. They wouldn't be able to afford to buy ski equipment for their kids and spend $100 a day for a lift ticket at a place like Stowe, not even close. But fortunately, because Northeast Slopes is community run and it's nonprofit, kids ski for free. Don't have equipment? Don't worry about it. All the equipment is donated for kids at Northeast Slopes. And I had the most wonderful day there. I did spend some money. How much money? Did I spend $20? I did not spend $20. Less. I spent 16 bucks. You could spend that much for a soft drink at a place like Killington. I spent 16 bucks. I spent 10 bucks for a half day lift ticket. I spent another $6 for a delicious Nor'easter, their signature cheeseburger, and their tiny little garage sized ski lodge. And I got to spend the day and chew the fat with Wade Peterson, whose job it is right now to be chief volunteer at Northeast Slopes. And it is really a statement about what communities can do when they want to take ownership of something to help their communities and create a place to gather. God bless them. Well, with that, we are out of the North Country and we are heading south again. And we're going to re-enter Massachusetts through the Berkshires. And love the Berkshires. Maybe many of you do too. I always think when people think of the Berkshires, they think of like a few different things, really, most, right? I mean, obviously, Lenox, right? Summer home of the Pops, the BSO. Stockbridge. If you think of Stockbridge, a lot of people think right away of Norman Rockwell. Spent the last 20 years of his life living and working in Stockbridge. There is Norman Rockwell in his studio in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. There is the studio, which today is the home of the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge. And there is Stockbridge, painted by Norman Rockwell. You know, if you know anything about Rockwell, you may know that he spent the last 20 years of his life in Stockbridge. You may know that he was very famous. Look, you probably know that he's America's greatest illustrator, world-renowned painter. You may know that he painted almost entirely from real-life models, never painted from photographs. He liked to have people and things modeled for him. What a lot of people don't know about Rockwell is that those last 20 years of his life living in Stockbridge, he devoted a lot of attention to some of America's social issues. And the social issue that really fascinated Rockwell most was the issue of race in America. And in 1967, for instance, back up even earlier, in 1964, he did a very famous work called The Problem We All Live With, which depicts a very, very brave 8-year-old girl, Ruby Bridges, following behind two U.S. Marshals, and she is about to integrate a segregated school in New Orleans, Louisiana. And 3 years later, 1967, he painted the cover photo for a special edition on Race in America by Life magazine. This was one facet of Race in America. This was about the integration of America's urban neighborhoods, families of color moving in. This is Rockville, Illinois. Everybody in that painting, as far as I know, was a native of Stockbridge, Massachusetts, including the young African-American gentleman on the far right or far left, depending on how you're looking at it at home. Long sleeve white sweatshirt, right? Baseball glove behind his back, plaid shorts, right? His name is Ray Gunn, W-R-A-Y-G-U-N-N, Ray Gunn. First of all, how great a name is Ray Gunn. I would have paid my parents a small monthly stipend to change my name to Ray Gunn Reinstein. Has a ring to it, right? But Ray Gunn got the name. You might be wondering, how did he end up modeling for Norman Rockwell? Good question. There were not a lot of families of color living in Stockbridge, Massachusetts in 1967. And frankly, there aren't a lot more today, but there were even fewer in 1967. The Gunns were one of them. And Ray Gunn's grandfather was a very close friend of Norman Rockwell. Close. I mean, they actually hung out together. The end of the day, sometimes Ray's grandfather would go over and visit with Rockwell. They'd smoke a pipe, have a drink. So it must have come to be that in 1967, Rockwell must have shared with Ray Gunn's grandfather that he was doing this new work. He was in need of a young black teenager so he could use as a model. And Ray's grandfather must have said, my grandson, Ray, he's 13. Perfect. And he was. And he posed for Norman Rockwell in 1967. He was no longer 13 when I met Ray many years later. In fact, he was now directing tours at the Rockwell Museum. And I thought it was really interesting. I said to him right there when he was standing in front of that photograph painting, I said, Ray, I said, this is very interesting. You are somebody who works where there is a world famous painting. And what's more, you're in it. I said, how does that feel? And Ray is very dry. He's got a very dry sense of humor. And he's looking at the painting, and he looked back at me, and he looked at the painting, and he looked back at me, and he said, well, I guess it's nice to know there's some place in the world where I'm forever 13. Ain't that the truth? And in my first book, New England Notebook, I have a whole chapter on the Berkshires, and the chapter, and I profile Ray in more detail, and the name of the chapter, appropriately enough, is Forever 13. Ray Gunn, lovely guy. So with that, we're heading back to Boston. Now, if you're doing the math at home, you may have said to yourself at some point now, okay, wait a minute. You called it New England Road Trip. There's 6 states in New England. We just visited 1, 2, 3, 4 states. What about the other 2 states? What about them? So another little idiosyncrasy of mine, I like when I travel to make a clean loop. Sometimes I can't, but I always try to make like a clean circle. Ask my dog. Not that my dog can talk, but if she could, she'd tell you, yeah, he does that even when he takes me for a walk. So I didn't want to like start in Boston, jump south, go back north, come back south. So I would never, however, neglect in any way 2 of my favorite states, Rhode Island and Connecticut. So very quickly, a little love song in 45 seconds to Rhode Island and Connecticut. 221. You know, a lot of people in Texas actually know what that number is. I'm not saying everybody, but I think if you stop 10 people, 2 or 3 would know that number. They'd say, oh, that's how many times Texas fits in that little state. What's that? Rhode Island fits into Texas. That's true. That's true. However, there's a lot you can find in Rhode Island that you can't find in Texas. And there are things you can't find in Texas you can find in Rhode Island, like authentic New England, Rhode Island style calamari sauce. Can't find it in Texas. You know what else you can't find in Texas, no matter how hard you look? A coffee cabinet, which of course is Rhode Island speak for a coffee milkshake, right? And there's no better place to get a coffee cabinet than at Delecta's. There's great old-time soda fountain at Delecta's Pharmacy in Warren, Rhode Island. And Warren, Rhode Island, by the way, is interesting in itself. It's the Russian nesting doll of towns, right? So you know those Russian nesting dolls, right? Where you keep taking them off and they get smaller, 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 smaller. Warren, Rhode Island is the smallest town in the smallest county in the smallest state in America. So yeah, Texas loves to do that whole, you know, don't mess with Texas. I wouldn't mess around with a whole lot of Rhode Islanders. Just a tip, Mr. Texan. Connecticut, you know, people think of different things when they think of Connecticut. A lot of history, birthplace of the insurance industry. However, I actually think of one thing whenever I think of Connecticut, and it may not be what you're thinking: pizza. And I don't mean New London style. I mean New Haven style. Because in New Haven, Connecticut, an embarrassment of riches. Because on Worcester Street, in the Italian section of New Haven, bookending that street are 2 of the best pizzerias in America, possibly the best. I've had pizza all over the world. I've had pizza all over Italy. And I can honestly say, I've never tasted better. I've tasted great pizza. I can't say I've tasted better pizza than I've had at Pepe's and Sally's. Frank Pepe immigrated from Naples, Italy in the late 1920s, started his own pizzeria serving on authentic Neapolitan pizza, hired his nephew, Sal Consiglio. Sal learned everything there was to learn about making pizza, opened up his own place, and today they're both still going strong. There's Bobby Consiglio, Sally's son, still running things out of the original brick oven today. Best pizza in America, bar none. Dessert, anybody? I did mention diners. So I'll tell you what, taking us to the finish line, I'm going to spend 45 seconds or so quickly telling you in the 4 states I visited, my favorite diners. So I love pie. I love banana cream pie above all. Best banana cream pie I've ever had. Little place on Route 1A, Agawam Diner in Rowley, Massachusetts. Absolutely. In Maine, 2 diners. In Waldoboro, Moody's Diner. What is there to say about Moody's? It's like the most quintessential diner you'll ever see. Amazing sign. In Biddeford, Maine, my favorite kind of diner, a diner that's been saved and reopened, the Palace Diner. In New Hampshire, a diner that combines two of my favorite things, politics and great diner food. And as you probably know, nobody's run for president in the last 75 years without campaigning at some point in the Red Arrow. And there is former President Barack Obama chatting some folks up when he was running in 2008. In Vermont, also two diners, both in southern Vermont. The Chelsea Royal Diner in West Brattleboro. How is that for a diner sign? Is that the best sign? And the Country Girl in Chester, another one of my favorite diners where a couple has saved their dream. Just like Julie and Brian Soper, right? With the Gurnett Trading Company in Maine. Their dream, this couple's dream was to open a diner. Now I hope they're able to hold on to it. And as we finish, almost back in Boston, my favorite diner, the Boulevard. The Boulevard in Worcester, I'm sure many of you have been there, not far from any of the towns that you're in tonight. On Shrewsbury Street, this is a diner that was built and manufactured in Worcester, less than half a mile from where it still sits on Shrewsbury Street today. Look at that sign. That's the best diner sign in the world. It doesn't say breakfast all day. It doesn't say come in, we're open. It just says diner. It's on, it's warm, it's inviting. It's meant to make you feel at home. And as we finish, we see the lights of Fenway Park. I hope we'll be back in person there over the course of the next year, safe at home. I hope public libraries will be all opened up and the lights on there as well, because I so miss in-person events at public libraries. And I have a new book coming out next fall, and I hope I will be able to share it with you in person in all three, Acton, Boxborough, Littleton. I hope I'll be able to come back and share it with all of you in person. And with that, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me on our New Normal New England road trip tonight. I'd be happy to take any questions and invite Cheryl back in to help me out. I'd be happy to take any questions anybody has. I'm going to leave this up there because if any of you are interested in purchasing any of my books, I just want to tell you how. All you got to do is go to my website. Go to my website. If you want a signed copy, which you can't get on my website, just shoot me an email. There's my email address. Shoot me an email. I'll shoot you an email back. I'll tell you exactly how to get it, and then I will mail it to you for free. No, I mean, the book costs money, but not the shipping. Totally free. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Ted. That was so engaging and so informative.
You're welcome.
You
Thank
make me want to get in my car and take a ride.
Well, go. I'll handle this. Go ahead. I'll close up.
Just so you know, if anybody has any questions, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can put your cursor down at the bottom of the screen and click on the chat button and ask the question that way. So I do have one hand raised, so
Sure.
I will allow them to talk.
Mm-hmm.
This is Karen.
Hi, Karen.
If you unmute yourself, Karen, you should be able to talk.
There. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Hi, Karen.
Oh, hey. This was wonderful. And I love to travel. I love to learn about different cultures and all.
Oh,
What's
great.
your new book going to be about?
I'm sorry, did you say, what is my new book going to be about?
Yes.
I will tell you. Thank you very much for asking. So my new book is a departure. All my first three books were a series about New England and my reporting around New England. The new book is about another passion of mine, which is baseball and the integration of baseball. So Jackie Robinson, always been a hero of mine from the time I was a kid. I have a photograph of him right behind me here. However, over time, I became fascinated by some of the unsung heroes who helped prepare the road for Jackie Robinson, right? So the color barrier fell in baseball, meaning descended and became a reality in baseball and prevented Black baseball players from playing in Major League Baseball in the late 1880s. By 1890, Black ball players were no longer able to play Major League Baseball. But from that time until Jackie Robinson broke in with the Dodgers in 1947, the effort to integrate baseball never stopped. We just don't know who these people were. And I always thought it was so unfair, right? Because we know who Rosa Parks is. We know that Rosa Parks was an early pioneer in the civil rights struggle. right? But we don't know who many of these people were. This book profiles that struggle from the time that blacks were shut out of Major League Baseball until the time that Jackie Robinson, riding really the shoulders of all these unsung heroes, broke the color barrier. And the range of people who were these unsung heroes is part of what makes the story remarkable, because these were not just baseball players. They truly were unsung heroes. The Negro Leagues themselves was sort of an unsung hero in itself, because it showcased great black ball players, and whites across America were able to see in people like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson that, oh my God, these people are amazing. Why aren't they playing Major League Baseball? But other unsung heroes were people like Ida B. Wells, who was a crusading black journalist. She is credited with being really the first black journalist to bring stories as a journalist, to have been in the South, seen the scourge of lynching, and made that story something that white Americans began to be outraged about. And she was actually honored with a posthumous Pulitzer Prize just last year. It was people like the African American press. It was people like the Pullman Porters, who distributed black newspapers across America and raised consciousness of black folks about the need to integrate baseball. And it was finally people like celebrated units, all black units in World War II, who in their own way broke down the color barrier, because when they came home and they had died for freedom, there was this feeling that, okay, wait a minute, maybe they ought to be allowed to play baseball. So thanks for asking. That's what the book is about. I can't wait to share it with people. And I hope I'll be able to share it with a lot of you in your respective towns. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds right up my alley.
Oh, good. Oh, excellent.
Okay, so we have a couple questions in chat. What's
Yeah.
this I hear about Rhode Island clam chowder? Is it a real thing?
Is what a real thing?
Rhode Island clam chowder.
I hope I didn't mention Rhode Island clam chowder. Was that a slip of my tongue? I meant to say Rhode Island calamari sauce. Rhode Island calamari is a real thing. In fact, it's Rhode Island's official state appetizer. That's very much a real thing. I don't know about Rhode Island clam chowder. There is something that is called Manhattan clam chowder, and anybody who loves clam chowder knows that Manhattan clam chowder, while technically it's a real thing, is not a thing to, you know that there are some towns in New England that actually have laws on the books that ban making Manhattan style clam chowder, which is tomato-based clam chowder. So I don't know about Rhode Island style clam chowder. I may have, if I said that, I shouldn't have. I meant Rhode Island calamari.
Okay. Then someone wants to know what the name of the town in Maine where the Gurnett Trading Company.
Gurnett Trading
located?
Company.
Yeah.
Yes. So technically it's in Brunswick, Maine, but it's in a little place in Brunswick called Buttermilk Cove. Buttermilk Cove. And I think you can find it online. I was told that until recently they did ship their clam chowder, but I guess they're not doing it for some reason now. So you'll have to go and visit. There are worse things.
Yeah, hop in the car and take a ride. And then I'm not sure if this is a typo because I didn't hear you say this, but do you have a favorite place in Machias?
In Machia.
Yeah, I don't know. Peter, if you want to clarify.
Did somebody mean Machias?
Machias, yeah, sorry.
You know, I'm very proud of my knowledge of New England, but I also know when I don't know something. I don't know a thing about Machias. The only reason I know the name, well, I know where Machias is, but it's funny, you know, my dad had an army buddy who lived in Machias. And I always thought that was the most fun name to say, Machias, right? But I never got there. And I don't know. I don't know any favorite places in Machias. That might be a good trip for me sometime to do for Chronicle. And I could share with you what I just said. And then I could be like, wow, everything is new to me in Machias. But I don't. I can't pretend to know anything about it when I don't. Sorry.
Well, that's a new talk once you travel there.
Yeah, there
right?
you go. There you go. The main streets and back roads of Machias has a ring to it.
Exactly. So everything else is just a thank you so much. We learned so much.
Oh, thank
What a great road trip.
Thank you.
And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I had a great time. Cheryl, thank you so much for helping me out tonight. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. And thank you as well to the Community Health Network area number 15 for their sponsorship tonight. I had a great time. Thank you all, folks, for joining me. And I hope we'll get to do this in person sometime soon with my new book.
Me too. Thank you,
All right.
Ted. I
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you very much.
Bye
All
now.
right. Okay, thanks. Good night, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.